I am 52 years old, a woman who until recently would have described her life as quiet and complete. My husband, Mark, passed away 6 months ago. The silence he left behind is a physical presence in our home, a constant reminder of the half of me that is now missing. We were married for 30 years, a journey of shared laughter, quiet companionship, and the beautiful, chaotic project of raising our two children, Kyle and Sarah. Grief is a strange, disorienting landscape, and I was still learning to navigate it, one shaky step at a time. The world felt muted, the colors less vibrant, and my own heart beat with a slower, sadder rhythm. In the center of this fog was a small, solid object I held onto for comfort. It was Mark's ring. It was a simple gold signet ring, heavy and worn smooth in places from decades of constant wear. It was not flashy or expensive in the grand scheme of things, but its value to me was immeasurable. It was the ring his father had given him, and he had worn it every single day of our life together. When I held it in my palm, I could still feel the warmth of his hand. I could picture him drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, gesturing as he told a story, or gently tracing circles on my back to help me fall asleep. The ring was more than gold. It was a vessel for a lifetime of memories. It was the last piece of him I could physically touch, a tangible link to the man who was my entire world. My son, Kyle, is 28. He has always been ambitious, driven, and perhaps a little too focused on the outward appearance of success. His fiancée, Chloe, is much the same. They are a modern power couple, all sharp angles and carefully curated social media profiles. Since Mark's funeral, their attention towards me had felt pointed. Their calls were frequent, but the questions always seemed to circle back to practical matters. They asked about the will, about the life insurance, about Mark's collection of watches. Their concern felt less like sympathy and more like inventory management. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, telling myself that everyone processes grief differently. Perhaps their pragmatism was just a coping mechanism, a way to feel in control when everything else felt so chaotic. But a small, cold knot of unease was beginning to form in my stomach. My daughter, Sarah, who is 25, was my rock. She visited often, not with questions about assets, but with groceries and old movies she knew I loved. She would sit with me in the quiet, sometimes talking, sometimes just being present, allowing me to feel my sadness without judgment. She understood that my loss was not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be lived with. Her quiet empathy was a balm to my raw nerves, a stark contrast to the brittle energy that Kyle and Chloe brought into my home. She never once mentioned what her father had left behind, only what he had meant to us all. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder that not all of Mark's legacy was tied up in material things. The pressure from Kyle started subtly. During one of his visits, he picked up a framed photo of Mark from the mantelpiece. In the picture, Mark's hand was resting on my shoulder, the gold ring catching the light. "Dad had great taste," Kyle said, his eyes fixed on the ring in the photo. "Classic. Timeless," I nodded, my throat tight. "He loved that ring," I managed to say. Chloe, who was standing beside him, added, "It's such a beautiful family heirloom. It's so important to keep things like that in the family, passed down the right way." The phrase "the right way" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It felt like a test, a gentle probe to see how I would react. I simply said, "It is very important," and changed the subject. I did not want to have that conversation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Their hints became more frequent over the next few weeks. Chloe would mention a friend of hers whose fiancé had proposed with his grandfather's ring. Kyle would talk about the importance of a son carrying on his father's legacy. Each comment was a small chip against the wall I was trying to build around my grief. I knew what they were doing. They were laying the groundwork for a request I was not ready to hear. I continued to deflect, to offer vague responses, hoping they would understand that I needed more time. The ring was currently in a small, velvet-lined box in my jewelry case. I took it out every night before I went to sleep, holding it until the metal grew warm against my skin, whispering goodnight to my husband. It was a private ritual, a sacred connection that I was not willing to share. I tried to tell myself I was being overly sensitive. My grief was making me paranoid, making me see selfishness where there was only clumsy concern. Kyle was my son. He loved his father. Of course, he would want something to remember him by. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had seen the way his eyes lit up when he talked about expensive cars or designer clothes. I had seen the way Chloe assessed the value of everything she looked at. Their definition of legacy seemed to be written in dollar signs, not in memories. This feeling was a bitter pill to swallow. It felt like a betrayal not just to me, but to Mark's memory. The final push came, as so many things do these days, in the form of a text message. I was sitting in the garden, trying to find some peace in the afternoon sun, when my phone buzzed. It was from Kyle. My heart sank before I even read the words. The message was not a gentle inquiry or a heartfelt request. It was a declaration. It was a cold, presumptuous statement that shattered the fragile peace I had been trying to build. My hand trembled as I read it, and the quiet garden suddenly felt hostile and alien. The world tilted on its axis. The text message glowed on my phone screen, each word a tiny, sharp betrayal. It said, "Hey Mom, just letting you know I'm ready to take Dad's ring now. Chloe and I think it would be a great way to honor him. It's mine now, right?" I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words did not change. The casual, demanding tone felt like a slap in the face. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. The phrase, "It's mine now, right?" was the part that truly broke something inside of me. It wasn't a question seeking permission. It was a rhetorical question demanding confirmation of a fact he had already decided upon. The assumption of ownership, the complete erasure of my feelings or my connection to the ring, was breathtaking in its arrogance. My first reaction was a wave of pure, hot anger. My hands started to shake. How dare he? How dare he reduce his father's memory, my 30 years of marriage, to a piece of property to be claimed? The ring was on my dresser in my room, in my house. It was a part of my life with Mark. It was not some unclaimed item in a lost and found bin waiting for him to decide he was ready for it. The idea that he and Chloe had been discussing it, planning for it, deciding it was time for them to possess it, made me feel physically ill. It was as if they were vultures circling, waiting for the appropriate amount of time to pass before they could swoop in and pick the bones clean. Then, the anger gave way to a profound and aching sadness. This was my son. The little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fears of monsters under the bed I had soothed. Where had that boy gone? When had he been replaced by this cold, grasping man who saw his father's death as an opportunity for acquisition? I felt a chasm opening up between us, a vast, empty space that I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. He wasn't just asking for a ring. He was revealing a fundamental flaw in his character, a lack of empathy so deep it frightened me. He was treating my grief as an inconvenience, a temporary obstacle to getting what he wanted. I did not respond to the text. I couldn't. What could I possibly say? Typing out my rage and hurt felt both pointless and undignified. Arguing with him over a text message seemed like a trivialization of the immense pain I was feeling. So I simply stared at the screen until the words blurred. I put the phone down on the garden table and walked back into the house, the silence of the empty rooms pressing in on me. I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened the small velvet box. The ring sat there, solid and real. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of love and memory, and now, heavy with the weight of this new, ugly conflict. Holding it, I felt a surge of protectiveness. This was not his. Not like this. I decided I needed to talk to someone who would understand, someone who wasn't an immediate part of the tense family dynamic. I needed an outside perspective. I called my sister, Claire. She listened patiently as I read her the text message, my voice cracking with emotion. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she spoke. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice full of a weary sympathy that told me she wasn't entirely surprised. "That is just awful." "I am so sorry. What do I do?" Claire asked, my voice small. He thinks it belongs to him. He and Chloe have clearly decided. No, Claire said, her tone firm. They do not get to decide. Mark left that ring to you. It is yours. You get to decide what happens to it. End of story. Her certainty was a lifeline. He's going to push, I said. He'll make me out to be the bad guy. He'll say I'm being selfish, that I'm not honoring his father's memory. Let him, she replied without hesitation. Anyone who knows you, anyone who knew Mark, will know that's not true. This isn't about honoring Mark. This is about Kyle wanting something he feels entitled to. And that girl of his is feeding it. I'm sure of it. Claire had never been Chloe's biggest fan, finding her to be insincere and materialistic. It seemed her initial assessment had been spot on. We talked for over an hour. Claire helped me see the situation with more clarity. This was not just a moment of poor judgment on Kyle's part. It was a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for years, now brought into sharp focus by the raw emotions of grief. She reminded me of Kyle's 21st birthday, when he had been openly disappointed with the perfectly good used car Mark and I had bought him, complaining that his friends were getting brand new models. She reminded me of the time he'd borrowed a significant amount of money from his father for a business investment that turned out to be a lavish vacation with Chloe. Mark had been so hurt by the deceit. Remembering these things, the cold knot in my stomach tightened. Kyle's text wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a long-standing sense of entitlement, a belief that he deserved the best of everything without having to earn it. His father's death had simply removed the one person who had occasionally tried to hold him accountable. Now he saw me as the only thing standing between him and what he believed was his birthright. The conversation with Claire solidified my resolve. I was not going to be bullied. I was not going to let Mark's memory be tainted by this greed. I ended the call feeling stronger. My sadness now mingled with a steely determination. I still did not know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew what I was not going to do. I was not going to give him the ring. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. It was another text from Kyle. "Did you get my message?" It read. The impatience was palpable even through the screen. I ignored it. An hour after that, another one arrived. "Mom, seriously, are you just going to ignore me? We need to sort this out." The words "sort this out" implied there was a problem to be solved, and the problem, in his mind, was my possession of his ring. The audacity was stunning. He was manufacturing a conflict and then blaming me for not resolving it to his satisfaction. The pressure was mounting. I knew a simple no would not be enough. He would argue, he would wheedle, he would manipulate. I needed a plan. I needed to do something that would end the conversation for good, something that would make it clear that the ring was never going to be his. The seed of an idea began to form in my mind, something radical and irreversible. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also undeniably, deeply satisfying. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I made any final decisions. Ignoring Kyle's texts was a temporary solution, but I knew a direct confrontation was inevitable. Before that happened, I wanted to be sure I wasn't misreading the situation. I decided to call Sarah. She was the calm center of our family, and her perspective was invaluable. I needed to know if she had any insight into Kyle's mindset. I dialed her number, my heart pounding a little. I hated drawing her into this, but I felt like I was navigating in the dark. "Hi, Mom," she answered, her voice warm and cheerful. "How are you doing today?" The simple question almost made me cry. It was so full of genuine care, a stark contrast to the demanding tone of my son. I'm struggling with something, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's about Kyle." I could hear the smile fade from her voice. "What did he do now?" she asked, a note of resignation in her tone. That response told me everything I needed to know. This was not a surprise to her. I took a deep breath and read her the text messages from Kyle. There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "I am so sorry, Mom," Sarah said. "I was afraid this was going to happen. He's been talking about it." My stomach dropped. "He has? To you?" "Yes," she confirmed. "For weeks. It started right after the funeral, actually. He mentioned that he was the man of the family now and that Dad's ring should belong to him. He said it was his responsibility to carry on the family name, and the ring was a symbol of that. The phrase, man of the family, was so arrogant, so dismissive of the fact that I was still here, the head of our family, Mark's partner. "And Chloe?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She's the one pushing him the hardest," Sarah said, her voice laced with frustration. "She's completely fixated on it. She keeps calling it the heirloom and talking about how amazing it will look on Kyle's hand. She even said something about how it would be the perfect thing to announce their engagement with, to show everyone that he's taking his role as head of the family seriously. It's all about appearances with her, Mom. It's about the status of it. The idea of them using Mark's ring, my ring, as a prop for their engagement announcement made me see red. They wanted to strip it of all its personal meaning and turn it into a symbol of their own ambition. He told me that Dad had promised it to him," I said quietly. "He said Dad always said he'd get it," Sarah scoffed. "That is a complete lie," she said firmly. "Dad never said that. In fact, I remember a conversation we all had a few years ago, remember? We were talking about Grandma's jewelry, and Dad said specifically that sentimental things should go to the person who values the memory, not the price tag. He looked right at you when he said it, Mom. He said that ring was a symbol of his life with you." Her words were a comfort, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy. My memory was correct. Mark's intentions were clear. He would have been horrified by Kyle's behavior. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. I was starting to feel like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're not being unreasonable," Sarah insisted. "Kyle is being a greedy, entitled jerk, and Chloe is encouraging him. You have every right to keep that ring forever. It's yours. Please don't let them bully you into giving it up." "I won't," I promised, and for the first time, I truly meant it. My resolve hardened from steel into diamond. The path forward was becoming clearer. A few days later, Kyle called. I had been ignoring his texts, and he had finally escalated to a direct call. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Kyle." "Mom," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "Why have you been ignoring my texts?" "I haven't been ignoring them, Kyle," I said calmly. "I've been thinking about them." "Well, what is there to think about?" he asked impatiently. "It's pretty straightforward. The ring is Dad's. I'm his son. It should come to me. It's tradition." I felt a flash of anger at his condescending tone. "It's not a tradition, Kyle," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's a request. And you didn't even make a request. You made a demand." There was a pause. "I didn't demand anything," he said, his voice shifting into a wounded, defensive tone. "I was just trying to do the right thing, to honor Dad. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this." This was his classic move. Twist the situation to make me the aggressor, the unreasonable one. "I am being difficult. I am the problem." "I'm not being difficult," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm telling you that the ring has immense sentimental value to me. It represents my 30 years with your father. I am not ready to part with it." "Not ready?" he scoffed. "What does that even mean? It's been 6 months. Chloe, and I think it's time to move forward, to let his legacy live on through me." The sheer narcissism of that statement was staggering. His legacy was not something to be worn on a finger. It was in the lessons he taught, the love he gave, the lives he touched. "Your father's legacy has nothing to do with a piece of gold, Kyle," I said sharply. "And you and Chloe do not get to decide on the timeline for my grief." "So, you're just going to keep it?" he asked, his voice rising. "You're just going to hoard it away in a box where no one can see it? That's not what Dad would have wanted. He would have wanted it to be worn with pride." I knew he was wrong. Mark was a humble man. He would have hated the idea of his ring being used as a status symbol. "I know exactly what your father would have wanted," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "He and I discussed it. And this isn't it that stopped him." "What are you talking about?" he asked, a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. "Dad and I never talked about it." "No," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "You didn't. But he and I did." I had planted a seed of doubt. He didn't know what I knew. This was the first small shift in power. I knew then that I needed more than just my own memory to fight this battle. I needed proof. The conversation with Kyle left me shaken but resolute. His attempts to gaslight me, to paint me as the emotional, irrational one, only strengthened my conviction. He wasn't just grieving clumsily, he was actively trying to manipulate me. The mention that Mark and I had discussed the ring's future had clearly unsettled him, but I knew he would regroup. He and Chloe would come up with a new angle, a new way to apply pressure. I needed something more concrete than my own word against his. My mind kept going back to what Sarah had said about Mark's conversation regarding sentimental items. I remembered it clearly, but a memory wasn't evidence. That's when I remembered Mark's brother, my brother-in-law, Jeff. Mark and Jeff were incredibly close. They talked on the phone several times a week and exchanged long, rambling emails about everything from politics to their golf scores. If Mark had ever expressed his feelings about Kyle's materialism, he would have expressed them to Jeff. I felt a surge of hope. Jeff lived a few states away, but we had stayed in touch since the funeral. I decided to call him. It felt like a long shot, but I had to try. "Jeff, it's me," I said when he answered. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," he said, his voice warm but tinged with the same sadness that colored my own. "Some days are better than others. How about you?" We talked for a while, sharing stories about Mark, finding comfort in our shared memories. Then, I took a deep breath and steered the conversation to the reason for my call. "Jeff, I need to ask you something, and it might seem a bit strange," I began. "Did Mark ever talk to you about Kyle? Specifically, about his attitude towards money and possessions?" Jeff let out a short, humorless laugh. "Did he ever not talk about it?" he said. "It was one of the great worries of his life. He loved that boy to death, you know that, but Kyle's appetite for things drove him crazy. Mark felt like he'd failed somewhere along the line, that he hadn't taught him the value of hard work, only the value of having things. My heart ached for my late husband, hearing his private anxieties laid bare. He was worried about what would happen after he was gone," Jeff continued. "He was afraid Kyle would just see his mother as a bank account." The words were harsh, but they rang with the unmistakable truth. "Did he ever mention the ring?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "His signet ring?" There was a pause. "Yes," Jeff said slowly. "Yes, he did. It was a few years back. Kyle had made some comment about it, something about how it would be his one day. Mark was really bothered by it. He said Kyle saw it as a trophy, not as a piece of his history. This was it. This was the validation I needed." "Do you remember what he said exactly?" I pressed, trying not to sound too desperate. "Let me think," Jeff said. "He said something like, 'The kid looks at my ring, and all he sees is the gold. He doesn't see his grandfather's initials. He doesn't see the dent it got when I fell off my bike as a kid. He just sees a price tag.' Mark said he'd rather throw it in the ocean than let Kyle sell it for a down payment on a fancy car, a down payment." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was too specific, too close to what I suspected Chloe's motives were. "A down payment," I repeated numbly. "Yeah," Jeff said. It was a real sore spot for him. "Why do you ask?" "Don't tell me the boy is already asking for it." "He's not asking, Jeff," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "He's demanding." I explained the situation, reading him Kyle's texts. Jeff was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a cold fury. "That ungrateful little. I am so sorry you're dealing with this. After everything you've been through," he says Mark promised it to him. I added. "He's lying," Jeff said flatly. "Mark told me explicitly, and I mean explicitly, that the ring was yours. It was a symbol of his marriage to you. He said, and I quote, 'That ring belongs on her dresser, not on his finger.'" He was adamant. I felt a wave of relief, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't being selfish. I was honoring my husband's wishes. "Jeff, this is so important," I said. "Is there any chance he ever wrote that down? In an email, maybe?" "It's possible," Jeff said thoughtfully. "We emailed constantly. Let me look. It might take me a day or two to search through the archives, but if it's there, I'll find it for you." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "You have no idea what this means to me. Don't thank me," he said gruffly. "I'm just doing what my brother would have wanted." After I hung up with Jeff, I felt a new sense of purpose. I was no longer just a grieving widow defending a keepsake. I was an executor of my husband's will, in spirit, if not in letter. But my investigation wasn't over. Jeff's mention of a down payment had lit a fire under me. Chloe's influence was all over this, I was sure of it. I decided it was time to talk to her directly. I needed to see if I could get her to reveal her true motivations. I sent her a text, asking if she could stop by for a cup of tea, just the two of us. She agreed immediately, probably assuming I was ready to capitulate and wanted to arrange the handover. She had no idea what was waiting for her. The thought gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. My plan was beginning to take shape, moving from a vague idea into a concrete strategy. I was no longer on the defensive. I was preparing to fight back. Chloe arrived the next afternoon, dressed in an outfit that was probably worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. She gave me a hug that felt both overly familiar and completely insincere. "It's so good to see you," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How are you holding up?" I made us tea, and we sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. I decided to start with a gentle, non-confrontational approach. I wanted to lull her into a false sense of security. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Kyle and I last spoke," I began, watching her face carefully. Her expression immediately became more alert, more focused. This was what she was here for. "I know how much the ring means to him," I continued, choosing my words with precision. "And to you? It's a powerful symbol of family, it really is," she said, nodding eagerly. "We just feel it's so important for Kyle to have that connection to his father, to carry a piece of him with him always. It's all about honoring his memory." Her words were perfectly polished, a well-rehearsed speech. But I could see the flicker of impatience in her eyes. She wanted me to get to the point. "It's funny," I said, taking a slow sip of my tea. "Mark was always so worried about that ring. Not about losing it, but about what it represented." Chloe tilted her head, a slight frown on her face. "What do you mean?" she asked. "He was a very sentimental man," I explained. "And he was concerned that some people might see the ring for its price tag and not for its history. He always said its real value was in the stories it held, not the gold it was made from." I was looking directly at her as I said this. I saw a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of something in her eyes. It looked like annoyance. I had hit a nerve. "Oh, of course," she said quickly, recovering her composure. "The sentimental value is the most important part. We would never think of it in any other way." She was a good liar, but I was a mother. I had decades of experience in spotting falsehoods. "I'm so glad to hear you say that," I said, my voice warm and encouraging. "Because its monetary value is actually quite significant. We had it appraised for insurance purposes years ago. It would be a terrible temptation for someone who was, say, trying to save up for a big purchase." I let the sentence hang in the air, a baited hook. She took it. "Well, of course it's valuable," she said, a little too defensively. "Things of that quality always are. But that's not the point. The point is the legacy." She was starting to get flustered. I decided to push a little harder. "I'm just so relieved," I said, pressing my hand to my heart. "Because if I thought for one second that either of you were thinking about its cash value, I don't know what I'd do. It would feel like such a betrayal of Mark's memory. Especially if, for instance, someone wanted to sell it to help with something like a down payment on a house." Her face froze. The friendly mask shattered for a split second, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. She had walked right into my trap. "I don't know why you would even suggest something so insulting," she said, her voice turning sharp and cold. "We would never do that. The very idea is offensive," but her reaction was all the confirmation I needed. The specificity of my example had shocked her. Jeff had been right. They had been talking about it. They had been planning to turn my husband's memory into a deposit for their new life. The rest of the conversation was short and strained. Chloe made her excuses and left quickly, the pretense of a friendly chat completely abandoned. As I watched her car pull away, I felt no triumph, only a deep, profound sense of disappointment. My suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were facts. My son and his fiancée were not just entitled. They were ghouls, picking over the details of my husband's estate for their own financial gain. The anger I had been suppressing for weeks finally boiled over, burning away the last of my hesitation. They wanted the ring. They wanted its value. Fine. I would give them its value. But I would do it on my own terms. That night, I received an email from Jeff. The subject line was simple. I found it. The email from Jeff was the final piece of the puzzle, the key that turned my simmering anger into a cold, hard plan. I opened it with a sense of both dread and anticipation. Inside was a forwarded email exchange between him and Mark from 3 years prior. The conversation had started with a discussion about their retirement plans, but it had veered into more personal territory. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning for the relevant section. And then I saw it. Mark had written, "On another note, Kyle made a comment about my ring again the other day. He said he couldn't wait to wear it himself. It bothers me, Jeff." He looks at it like it's a winning lottery ticket. He doesn't see her father's initials. He just sees the gold. I swear, he'd have it melted down and sold before my body was cold if it meant getting that sports car he's always drooling over. I've told his mother 100 times, that ring is hers. It's a symbol of our life together. It belongs on her dresser, not on his finger. I'd rather throw it in the damn ocean than see it used as a down payment on some flashy lifestyle he thinks he's owed. Every word was a vindication. Every sentence was a confirmation of my deepest fears and a testament to my husband's foresight. He had seen this coming. He had known his son's character. The phrase down payment appearing again was chilling. It was clear that this wasn't a new idea for Kyle and Chloe. It was a long-held ambition. I printed the email, the paper warm from the printer. I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. This was my shield and my sword. It was the undeniable truth, in my husband's own words. With this proof in hand, my path was clear. I was no longer just protecting a memento. I was carrying out Mark's explicit wishes. The idea that had been a terrifying whisper in the back of my mind now became a firm, loud decision. I was going to take the ring off the board entirely. I was going to transform it, to change it into something that could never be sold, something that would serve as a permanent lesson in value versus worth. I spent the next morning researching local jewelers. I wasn't looking for a big, fancy chain store. I needed someone old school, a craftsman who would understand the sensitivity of the task. I found a small, family-owned shop downtown that had been in business for over 50 years. The reviews spoke of discretion and artistry. I made an appointment for the following day. That night, I took the ring out of its box for the last time. I sat with it in my hands for hours, turning it over and over, tracing the worn initials with my thumb. I remembered the day Mark had put it on my finger playfully right next to my wedding band and said, "Now you have my whole heart and my whole hand." I cried. I cried for my husband, for the life we had built, and for the son who had become a stranger to me. I was mourning 2 losses now, the man I had loved and the boy I had raised. But as the tears subsided, they were replaced by a sense of calm. This was the right thing to do. It was a painful act, but it was also an act of love, of fierce protection for the memory of the man who had given me everything. The next day, I drove to the jeweler's shop. A quiet, elderly man with kind eyes and skilled hands greeted me from behind the counter. His name was Mr. Miller. "How can I help you, madam?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath and placed the velvet box on the counter. I opened it. He looked at the ring, his professional eye assessing its quality. "A beautiful piece," he said. "Classic signet. Very heavy. It was my husband's," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "He passed away recently. I'm very sorry for your loss," Mr. Miller said with genuine sympathy. "I have an unusual request," I said, meeting his gaze. "I want you to melt it down." He looked up from the ring, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Melt it down," he repeated. But this is a fine piece of gold, a family heirloom. Its time as an heirloom is over, I said firmly. I want you to take the gold and cast it into something else for me. I want you to make a keychain. Mr. Miller was taken aback. He polished his glasses, a thoughtful expression on his face. A keychain, he asked. From all this gold? It will be very heavy, I know, I said. That's part of the point. He seemed to sense there was a deeper story at play and had the good grace not to press for details. All right, he said slowly. A keychain. What design did you have in mind? I slid a piece of paper across the counter. On it, I had written the words I wanted engraved. I want a simple, thick, rectangular fob, I explained. And on one side, I want you to engrave these words. He put his glasses back on and read the paper. His expression was unreadable. He looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. He was silent for a long moment. Then, a slow, small smile touched the corners of his mouth. He nodded. I can do that, he said. Handing over the ring was one of the hardest things I have ever done. It felt like a final goodbye, a physical severing of my last tangible link to Mark. As I left the shop, my hand felt strangely empty. I drove home in a daze, the world outside my car windows seeming distant and unreal. But underneath the pain, there was a growing sense of power. I had taken control of the narrative. Kyle and Chloe wanted to turn the ring into a symbol of their future. Instead, I was turning it into a symbol of their character. The process would take about a week. A week for the gold to be melted, recast, and engraved. A week for me to prepare for the final confrontation. I knew it would be ugly. I knew it would likely destroy my relationship with my son forever. But it was a price I was willing to pay to protect my husband's legacy and my own dignity. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. Every time the phone rang, I expected it to be Kyle, his voice laced with suspicion and anger. But he remained silent. I suspected Chloe had warned him to back off for a while, to let me cool down before they launched their next assault. They were likely planning their next move, completely unaware that I had already made mine. This quiet period gave me time to think, to make sure I was truly ready for the consequences of my actions. There were moments of doubt late at night when I would lie in bed and wonder if I was being too harsh, too cruel. Was I destroying my family over a piece of metal? But then I would remember the cold, demanding tone of his text. I would remember Chloe's panicked, furious expression when I mentioned the down payment. I would remember my husband's words in the email from Jeff. And my resolve would harden once more. This was not about a piece of metal. It was about respect. It was about the difference between loving a person and loving what a person can give you. My son and his fiancée had failed that test in the most spectacular way possible. I was not the one destroying our family. I was simply holding up a mirror to the damage that had already been done. I spent time with Sarah, who, without knowing the specifics of my plan, could sense a shift in my demeanor. You seem different, Mom, she said one afternoon as we had lunch. You seem stronger. I've made some decisions, I told her vaguely. I'm tired of feeling like a victim in my own life, she squeezed my hand. Good for you, she said. Dad would be proud. Her support meant the world to me. It was a reminder that even if I lost my son, I was not alone. Then, the call came from Mr. Miller. Your item is ready for pickup, he said. My heart started to race. It was time. When I arrived at his shop, he greeted me with a respectful nod. He placed a small, heavy box on the counter. It was much heavier than the original velvet box that had held the ring. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was the keychain. It was thick, solid, and had the unmistakable warm glow of pure gold. It was a brutally simple object, a plain rectangle of polished metal. On one side, in clean, clear letters, were the words I had requested. World's okayest son. Seeing it in person was a jolt. It was so final, so absolute. The ring was gone forever, transformed into this strange, satirical monument. It was ugly and beautiful all at once. It was a statement. Mr. Miller watched me, his expression unreadable. "It is exactly what you asked for," he said quietly. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little shaky. "You did an excellent job. I paid him for his work, the cost of which was not insignificant, and left the shop with the box in my purse. It felt like a lead weight, both physically and emotionally. Now all that was left was the delivery. A part of me wanted to just mail it to him, to avoid the inevitable confrontation. But that felt cowardly. This was a lesson that needed to be delivered in person. I needed to see his face. I needed him to hear, from me, exactly why this had happened. I called him that evening. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'd like you and Chloe to come over for dinner on Saturday. There's something I need to give you." There was a short, surprised silence on his end. Then, I could almost hear the smug satisfaction in his voice. "Of course, Mom," he said. "We'd love to." Saturday sounds great. He thought he had won. He believed my silence and my invitation were signs of surrender. He thought he was coming over to collect his prize. He had no idea what was waiting for him. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not just for the dinner, but for the emotional battle that would follow. I cooked Mark's favorite meal, a pot roast with potatoes and carrots. It felt appropriate, a way to have him present in the room with us. I set the table with the good china. I wanted the setting to be as formal and deliberate as the act I was about to commit. This was not a casual family meal. This was a reckoning. Saturday evening arrived. The house was quiet, the smell of the roast filling the air. I felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes after a storm when you know there's nothing left to be destroyed. I had already grieved the loss of the ring. I had already grieved the loss of the son. I thought I had. All that was left was the final, messy act of clearing the wreckage. I placed the small, heavy box on the sideboard in the dining room, next to a framed photo of Mark. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. I opened it to find Kyle and Chloe standing on my porch, a bottle of overpriced wine in hand. They were both smiling, their faces alight with poorly concealed triumph.
Mum,"
Kyle said, giving me a quick, awkward hug. "Something smells delicious. It's your father's favorite," I said, leading them into the dining room. Their eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for the prize. I saw Chloe's gaze linger for a moment on the sideboard, but she couldn't have known what was in the box. We made it through dinner with strained small talk. They talked about their work, about a recent trip they had taken, about their plans for the future. It was all a performance, a prelude to the main event. I played my part, asking questions, nodding, refilling their wine glasses. The tension in the room was a palpable thing, a fourth guest at the table. Finally, as I cleared the dessert plates, Kyle could wait no longer. He cleared his throat, a self-important sound that I had come to despise. "So, Mom," he began, leaning back in his chair with an air of casual ownership. "You said you had something for me." Chloe looked at him, then at me, her face a mask of sweet anticipation. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for, the moment they had been pushing for since the funeral. I stood up and walked to the sideboard. I picked up the small, heavy box. I could feel their eyes on me, burning with greed and expectation. I walked back to the table and placed the box on the polished wood in front of my son. "You're right, Kyle," I said, my voice low and steady. "I do have something for you." He reached for the box eagerly, his fingers fumbling with the lid. He clearly expected it to be the familiar velvet ring box. The weight of it must have been the first clue that something was wrong. He lifted the lid. For a moment, he just stared, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. He saw the glint of gold, but the shape was all wrong. It was a thick, ugly rectangle, not the elegant circle he was expecting. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice flat. He lifted the heavy object out of the box. It dangled from its chain, catching the light from the chandelier above. He turned it over in his hand, and then he saw the engraving. I watched his eyes, scan the words. I saw the moment of recognition, the dawning horror, the wave of disbelief that washed over his face. "World's okayest son," he read aloud, his voice a choked whisper. Chloe leaned in to see, her jaw dropping. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "What did you do?" Kyle looked up at me, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion, anger, and a flicker of something that might have been hurt. "Mom, what is this?" he asked again, his voice rising. "Where's the ring? Where's Dad's ring?" I met his gaze, without flinching. "That is the ring," I said calmly. Or it was. I had it melted down. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Kyle stared at the keychain in his hand, as if it were a venomous snake. Chloe stared at me, her face pale with shock and fury. "You what?" Kyle finally stammered. "You melted it? Are you insane?" "No, Kyle," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the metal he was holding. "I am not insane. I am heartbroken. And I am disappointed. But I am not insane." "Why?" he yelled, slamming the keychain down on the table with a loud thud. The good china rattled. "Why would you do that? It was a family heirloom. It was mine." "No, it was not yours," I countered, my own voice rising to match his. "It was mine. And you didn't see it as an heirloom. You saw it as an asset. You saw it as a stepping stone to a bigger house and a fancier life. You saw your father's memory as something to be cashed in." "That's not true," he shouted, his face turning red. "I loved Dad. How could you say that?" "Because your father knew," I said, my voice dropping again, cutting through his anger. "He knew exactly what you would do." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded email from Jeff. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "Your Uncle Jeff and your father used to email each other all the time," I said, my eyes locked on Kyle's. "And 3 years ago, your father wrote this." I began to read. "Kyle made a comment about my ring again the other day." I read, my voice clear and steady. "He said he couldn't wait to wear it himself. It bothers me, Jeff. He looks at it like it's a winning lottery ticket. He doesn't see your father's initials. He just sees the gold." I watched as the color drained from Kyle's face. Chloe looked like she had been turned to stone. I continued reading, my voice unwavering. "I swear, he'd have it melted down and sold before my body was cold if it meant getting that sports car he's always drooling over. I've told his mother 100 times, that ring is hers. It's a symbol of our life together. It belongs on her dresser, not on his finger. I'd rather throw it in the damn ocean than see it used as a down payment on some flashy lifestyle he thinks he's owed." I finished reading and placed the paper on the table next to the keychain. The room was utterly silent. The evidence was irrefutable, the condemnation absolute. It was all there, in his father's own words. The motive, the character assessment, the final wish. There was nothing he could say. He couldn't claim I was being an emotional, grieving widow. He couldn't claim he was misremembering his father's promises. The truth was laid bare on the dining room table. "You wanted the ring, Kyle," I said quietly, my anger spent, leaving only a vast, empty sadness. "You wanted its value. So, I gave you its value. I turned it into something that reflects the worth of your character and the depth of your respect. It's not a priceless heirloom anymore. It's just a heavy piece of metal with a judgment engraved on it. You can't sell it. You can't use it to impress anyone. All you can do is carry it around and be reminded of why you have it instead of the real thing." Kyle stared at the email, then at the keychain, then at me. His face was a mask of shame and fury. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was Chloe who broke the silence. "You are a cruel, vindictive woman," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "To destroy something so beautiful, so meaningful, it's monstrous. The beautiful, meaningful thing was the love it represented," I said, looking directly at her. "And you two were the ones who tried to destroy that. I just preserved it, in a different form." Kyle finally found his voice. "I can't believe you," he whispered, shaking his head. "I can't believe you would do this to me." "To us, I didn't do this to you, Kyle," I said softly. "You did this to yourself. Every choice you made, every demanding text, every lie you told, led to this moment. This is the consequence. He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. He grabbed Chloe's arm. "We're leaving," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears of rage. He didn't even look at the keychain. He just turned and walked towards the door, pulling Chloe with him. At the doorway, he stopped and looked back at me, his eyes filled with a hatred that seared me to my soul. "I will never forgive you for this," he said. Ever. Then he was gone. The front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. I was left alone in the dining room, with the remains of our family dinner, a damning email, and a heavy gold keychain that said, "World's okayest son." I sank back into my chair, the manufactured calm finally deserting me, and I began to sob. The war was over, but the cost had been immense. The days following the dinner were eerily quiet. I heard nothing from Kyle or Chloe. It was a silence filled with anger and resentment, a void where a relationship used to be. I didn't know if he had taken the keychain with him or left it on the table. I hadn't had the strength to check. I just closed the door to the dining room and tried not to think about it. But the confrontation replayed in my mind over and over. His shock, Chloe's fury, the final, hateful look in my son's eyes. I had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow, tasting of ash and loss. Sarah called me the next day. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Kyle called me last night. He was hysterical." "I can imagine," I said wearily. "He told me you melted Dad's ring," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and awe. "He said you turned it into a keychain that called him okayest son. Is that true?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "It's true." There was a long pause on her end. I held my breath, waiting for her judgment. "Wow," she finally said.
Just wow.
"I don't know whether to be horrified or impressed. A little of both, maybe," I suggested. "He told me you were cruel and crazy," she said. "He tried to paint you as this unhinged, grieving widow who destroyed a priceless family heirloom out of spite. And what did you say?" I asked, my heart aching. "I told him he was an idiot," Sarah said fiercely. "I told him he had been pushing you for months, with no regard for your feelings. I told him he and Chloe were acting like vultures. I told him he got exactly what he deserved." A wave of gratitude washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." "Of course, Mom," she said. "I'm on your side. Always. But are you okay?" "That must have been incredibly hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted. "But it was the right thing. I have to believe that." The other shoe dropped a few days later, in the form of a phone call from my sister-in-law, Carol, Kyle's aunt on his father's side. Carol had always spoiled Kyle, always seen him as the golden boy who could do no wrong. I knew he would have run to her with his version of the story. "I just spoke to Kyle," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval, forgoing any pleasantries. "I have to say, I am shocked. Absolutely shocked at your behavior." I took a deep breath. I had been expecting this. "Hello, Carol," I said calmly. "Kyle told you his side of the story, I assume. He told me that in a fit of grief, you maliciously destroyed his father's priceless ring," she said, her voice rising. "He is devastated. That ring was his birthright. How could you be so selfish and cruel to your own son?" I listened patiently until she was finished with her tirade. "Are you done?" I asked quietly. "Now, let me tell you my side." I explained everything. I told her about the texts, the demands, the conversation with Chloe, and finally, I read her the email from Mark. When I was finished, there was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Well," she stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "Mark was probably just having a bad day when he wrote that. You know how he could get. And Kyle is a good boy. He's just ambitious." The excuses were pathetic. She was trying so hard to reshape the reality to fit her narrative of her perfect nephew. "He is not a boy, Carol," I said, my patience wearing thin. "He is a 28-year-old man who tried to bully his grieving mother into handing over a valuable asset. He lied about his father's wishes. He and his fiancée planned to sell the ring for a down payment on a house. That isn't ambition. That is greed. And I did not destroy the ring. I transformed it into a lesson that he desperately needed to learn. You've broken his heart, she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its conviction. No, I said, my voice firm. I've broken his sense of entitlement. And frankly, it's about time someone did. I ended the conversation shortly after. It was clear she would never see my side, but I had planted a seed of doubt. The unshakable proof of Mark's own words was something even she couldn't entirely dismiss. A week after the confrontation, I finally ventured back into the dining room. The table was just as I had left it. And there, sitting next to a wine-stained napkin, was the keychain. He had left it. He didn't want it. The sight of it filled me with a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. It was a monument to a broken bond, a testament to a lesson rejected. I picked it up. It was heavy, solid, and cold. I slipped it into my pocket. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I knew I couldn't just throw it away. It was a part of our story now, the ugly final chapter. My life has found a new, quieter rhythm. The storm has passed. The family is fractured, perhaps irreparably. Kyle and Chloe are no longer in my life. I hear snippets of information through Sarah. They are still together, still planning their perfect future, though I imagine their plans have been somewhat delayed without the windfall they were expecting. I have no doubt they tell everyone who will listen that their mother is a monster. But the people who matter, the people who knew and loved Mark, know the truth. Jeff calls me regularly, just to check in. Sarah visits every weekend. We are a smaller family now, but we are a stronger one, bound by love and respect, not by obligation or greed. Sometimes, when I am alone, I take the keychain out of the drawer where I keep it. I hold the heavy gold in my hand. It is a constant, tangible reminder of the painful choice I had to make. It reminds me that I stood up for myself, that I honor my husband, and that I refuse to be a victim. It is an ugly, sad object, born of betrayal and disappointment. But it is also a symbol of my own strength. I stopped waiting for my son to become the man his father wanted him to be. Instead, I gave him exactly what he had earned. He learned what it feels like to be told no. He learned that some things and some people are not for sale. And that, I think, is a legacy his father would have been proud of.